Hello and welcome to this edition of AACRAO's Credential Chats. Really excited this week to be joined by one of my just favorite people in this space, Collin Sullivan. He is the coordinator of digital credentialing at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Collin, thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to join us.
Thanks for having me, Noah. And you're also one of my favorite people in this space. So,
Aw. well, I appreciate that. And I know that your role is not specifically, in an office of the registrar role, but you came into this, from a really comprehensive, I think, kind of approach at UMBC that I'm personally drawing a lot of motivation, inspiration from. And so, one of the first places that, I know you mentioned you wanted to start with was just words. And so, especially in light of our own report out of ACRAO, that we called credential confusion, I think that that's probably a great starting place. So, get on your soapbox and tell us, what do you want to talk about words?
yeah, I feel like I wouldn't be a graduate student if I didn't want to talk about words too. Like that feels bad. But yeah, absolutely. So, just to add a little bit of context, I'm really fortunate to have worked with a number of colleagues here at UMBC that started kind of our badging initiative before I started doing this work here. Um, but it was a long time coming and a long time doing this work that we were issuing badges for a number of experiences, right? From attending a webinar to a student that's completed a 15-week long internship that was submitting weekly reflections at an offsite location, right? Um, all of those things and everything in between was getting this thing that we called a badge, right? And I think that we spent some time here at UMBC really kind of backing up and thinking, what's the why, right? Why are we doing this work? Why are we acknowledging these things that people do on our campus, whether that's faculty, staff, or student, about their this experience and recognizing that with a badge. And that's really what it is about, right? It's about recognition, articulation, validation, and verification from the institution, right? Like, how are we doing those things? And a badge is really that means to the end, right? So we have tons and tons of experiences from all of our learners from across campus. We're using this term badge from everything in between. And really, that word badge just isn't that helpful, right? For learners, it can equate unlike experiences synonymously. Faculty kind of reduces the validity and utility of what these badges are. And we know that in my experience, some of our faculty don't resonate with that word. And again, for the institution, if we are thinking about what our kind of institutional brand and reputation is when we are creating these things, how can we better add context and definition? So that's a lot already, right? That's a lot to kind of think about and kind of like what we're stewing on. So I'm very fortunate that over the past year or so, we worked with a lot of colleagues to really rethink our broader digital credentialing efforts. And this was a really important conversation, thinking about the words that we use when we're in this space. I would be remiss if I didn't give a huge shout out to our colleague, Sherry Braxton. She worked on this beautiful, beautiful taxonomy because that was having this taxonomy or lack thereof was part of this challenge, right? Thinking about the different types of experiences. And when I talk about this digital badge taxonomy that Sherry worked on, I really think of it as kind of this Rosetta Stone between the academy and the workforce, because it's really marrying knowledge, skills, and abilities and mapping them with Bloom's revised learning outcomes. So we're kind of speaking the language of both employers who we know are going to be digesting and consuming these digital credentials, but also still working and having a kind of foot in the door with our faculty that are designing these learning experiences for our students and really all of our learners. So now we don't just say that we create badges, right? We create different types of badges based on experiences. And the way that kind of I've thought about this is like a bachelor's degree, right? We have a bachelor's of science, we have a bachelor of arts, right? They're both bachelor's degrees, but we have kind of different expectations because one's a bachelor of arts and one's a bachelor of science, right? And that's how I'm kind of thinking about different types of digital badges, and we really say micro credentials here at UMBC. And because they're so nimble and more digestible, we have these digital credentials. They're reflective of the knowledge, skills, or abilities that folks are acquiring. the learning outcomes and the assessments and the alignment that's happening between those different concepts, right? So,
And Collin, can I real quick just to because I think that a lot of registrars who might be watching you talk about this are definitely not along with the first part of what you were saying of we have all these different things, but we're calling them this one thing.
right.
And that's where we start to get nervous when we start to look at these are formal recognitions, these are learning records that have our institution's brand on them. And I hear you talking at UNBC, you all were able to approach it as from a place of yes, here's this word badge that we're using, and with the help of a taxonomy, we can make sense of these things internally. So, in the absence of national standards, in a same way, one size fits all of doing this at UMBC, you've successfully navigated a path to having all these different stakeholders, including faculty, comfortable with yes, there's this word badge, it means different things, and we have a taxonomy so we know when it means what. Is that
100%. Yes, that is exactly what we were aiming to do. So, using that taxonomy, we say that we have a knowledge micro-credential, we have a proficiency micro-credential, a mastery micro-credential. Those are different types of micro-credentials. They have different criteria, they have different expectations, they have different types of learning outcomes associated with each different type of micro-credential. And I do want to recognize we still have this engagement micro-credential, right? We still know that, we want to use badges to incentivize folks to participate in something, or maybe we want to recognize an achievement. And we still have that type of micro-credential still for that purpose. But the principle remains as what you were hitting at is that we have these distinct different types of micro-credentials with different expectations associated for them. And again, that's kind of win-win, right? It's a win for our faculty members that are saying that they're designing these learning experiences and we can have an associated micro-credential for them. And it's a win for our learners, right, that are earning these digital credentials so that they can talk in a more nimble and articulate way about their actual achievement in their learning experience.
And so, just one thing to clarify is I'm hearing you say that there's these discrete types of micro credentials, and that there's objective look fors. That if you want to propose a new micro credential at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, that depending on what type of micro credential you want to propose, there is a policy level sort of understanding of okay, we can do that as long as it meets these key look fors. That there has to be I'm hearing earning criteria, there has to be
Yeah.
assessment. Do you mind just kind of fleshing that out a little bit for us?
Absolutely. So a great example of this is when I'm looking at our knowledge micro-credential, right? So we can create this knowledge credential. I'm actually working on right now in our management of information systems courses, where we are asking students in that course to identify different principles of management, right? And their kind of assessment that's going with that is a multiple choice assessment where they're going to be identifying different parts of management practices, right? That is very clearly a knowledge micro-credential for me, right? We're having some learning outcomes on the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy. The assessment is that identification, so it aligns with the learning outcomes. All of that rings true for a knowledge micro-credential to me. I would not have that proposal and say like, oh, this is a mastery micro-credential, right? That does not align with the higher levels of cognition that we would be expecting and the more authentic assessments that we'd be looking for in that process as well. So something like a mastery micro-credential that we're working on, we have kind of a fellowship of young scholars that are learning about best teaching practices where they're curating a portfolio detailing their teaching assistantships and the work that they're putting into that experience. That kind of process significantly more aligns with the mastery micro-credential because of the expected learning and the assessment that we're creating and how it aligns between the two. So it always goes back to what are we trying to do, right? What do we want our learners to be able to articulate and not inherently trying to designed for the badge, right? We're trying to use a micro-credential to acknowledge whatever's happening, whatever learning is happening, and making sure that we have the right words around that to make sense.
I love that point, Colin. I think that's so important that we can get so just, consumed by and mystified, by and with the shiny new technology. And I really appreciate you anchoring us in. At the end of the day, the digital credential piece is how we're recognizing, the learning achievement. The learning achievement, though, is still the heart of what we're doing on our campus, and let's not lose sight of that. As an organization that started out big and continues to go big, but has already had a pretty big pivot from where you started, can you just kind of share any kind of lessons learned that others might be able to take from your journey?
Yeah, 100%. Um there's already a lot to unpack there, so I'll try to make it brief. But I think that digital credentialing, it's really exciting, but it's an iterative process, right? And I think that we're continually thinking about, well, what can or should or ought we be doing in this space, right? And I think, you and I both know this. We talk to folks that are always coming from different institutions trying to launch or rethink their current micro-credentialing or digital badging initiatives. And I think what's exciting is to just keep thinking that it's not done. And we're, practitioners in this space, we're continually looking at each other. And I like AACRAO's, not to do a plug that's not sponsored or anything, but the AACRAO Alternative Credentialing Report that came out, I think in 22, was just so helpful and so timely for us as an institution, for a number of reasons. But it really gave us oh, are we thinking this way? Are we using some of these definitions? But all of that to say, we went and approached that report as to, we haven't figured this out, right? We may be onto something, we may be doing something that feels right for our institution, but because this isn't set in stone and we haven't like met this moment where we feel like we've made it, looking to peers and looking at how we can collaborate has really opened the doors for so many future collaborations and future possibilities. Because at the end of the day, all of this comes back to, how is this work going to be relevant for our learners and earners of digital credentials, right? We want to make sure that we're doing kind of these best practices things. But I think that because we're all in this space together, we're kind of building out the best practices as we go along. So the more opportunities that we can have conversations to work with each other, and learn how we can do that, it's going to be better for everyone.
And I almost feel like you're making a case here for bold humility. Uh, part of embracing the iterative nature of this is embracing our own humility, and avoiding hubris of just assuming we've not yet perfected this and we will need to continue to improve. And that's why we iterate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Collin, we kind of started from a place of you, on your soapbox of words matter. And I'm wondering, beyond, you started with the taxonomy piece and that iterative process at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. As you kind of future cast and look to what's next and where things are going, where are other places where you see this, being an unsettled issue, an iterative process, if you will, with that fact that words matter.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's been one of those things where I feel like we've talked about it a lot in digital credentialing spaces, but I want to see more and more examples of that. And that is, how can we use digital credentials as a tool for building pathways for equity, right? And I'm really thinking about that as I'm having conversations with counterparts at community colleges, right, that are doing amazing work building out digital credentials at community colleges. I want to make sure that at a four-year institution, we're being thoughtful and inclusive of creating pathways from a community college to a four-year institution, and not ignoring digital credentials and other credentials folks have earned in that pathway, right? And recognizing that it's not going to be a linear learning journey, but how can we think about the different types of credentials and what this really looks like. I don't have a solid answer for that yet, but it is like always on my mind about how can we kind of really live up to the promise of how we can use digital credentials as a pathway for equitable learning.
Collin, that is such a great note to end on. Folks, you've been learning today with Collin Sullivan. Again, he is the coordinator of digital credentialing at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Collin, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Noah.
Thanks, everybody. Have a badge-worthy week, and we will see you next week.